Hey, what's up? Welcome back. In this episode, you're going to see how to add attachments to our products. We're going to use the same file uploading structure, but we're going to also take a look at counter caches, which is a nice feature of Ruby on Rails. And so let's get into it. The vision is we want to take this internal product show page, which has kind of been a dumping ground for a bunch of test stuff. We have a bunch of images here, this checkout button, all of it's got to go. What I want to do is add a table that will list out all the different attachments that are available when a customer buys this product. And so we're going to start with maybe just jumping over here and grabbing a table here, an HTML table. And now let's open up that product show page. And we're going to remove that thumb. We're going to remove the button. And we'll just dump that table in there. And this is going to be our attachments. So this is going to be a list of all the attachments that customers have access to when they buy this product, or when they buy and then the name of the product. Okay, so now if we come back over here, refresh the page, now we can see this table of attachments, but I kind of want to move it so that it fits better. Also, I spelled attachments wrong. I think it's like, yeah, it's this here. So that is a toughie. Okay, so attachments. Okay, now we also want to do something here where we're going to add maybe this header. And again, we're going to add attachments. And let's also add a div with class flex so that we can have the image on the left and then the table on the right. So we'll wrap this in a div. And then we'll say this is going to be flex auto so that the table has as much space as it wants to grow. Okay, let's come back over here, take another look. All right, looking pretty good, looking pretty good. Instead of attachments, what am I doing? We want this to be the product name. Okay, so this should be the product name. And then above all of this, we want some like margin top, probably 8 or so, just so there's, okay. Now we have these attachments. We have this add user button. None of the content of the table makes any sense because we don't actually have the concept of attachments in the database yet. Let's jump into the terminal and add some models. Rails-G model attachment. And an attachment is going to have a file, but that's going to be added with active storage, so we don't actually need anything in the database for it. But we will want the attachment to be related to a product. So that's going to be a product references. We also maybe want to give a name to an attachment. I'm not sure. And then here is where we're going to start thinking about what we want to do with these attachments. Every time an end customer downloads an attachment, I think we want to increment a counter or keep track of that. Now, one way we could do that is have a separate table called attachment views. And if we want to know how many times has this attachment been downloaded, we could do a query that does a join on the attachment views table and groups by the attachment and then gives us a count. However, there is a way in Rails to add a denormalized field called a counter cache. So here we might say something like views count or something and make this an integer. And the data in this field is going to be the count of how many related objects there are. And that is just a simple sort of optimization trick that you can do to improve performance. All right, so that attachment looks good. Let's also generate a new model called an attachment view. An attachment view is going to be related directly again to an attachment. References, and it's also going to be related to a customer. And the attachment view, let's see, it's also going to have some date times or timestamps or whatever, but that's fine. One thing we could also potentially use an attachment view for is limiting how many times someone downloads something. So if you wanted to, say, add some restriction later down the road where you said, okay, you can download this book up to 3 times. After you've downloaded it the 3rd time, things get a little fishy. You're probably not reading an ebook. I don't know, maybe 10, more than 10 times, right? Okay, let's open up well, first let's migrate the database, RailsDB migrate. And boom, okay, that looks great. Let's open up the attachment here. And so the attachment belongs to a product and it has many attachment views. Okay, yeah, sure. And the attachment view belongs to an attachment. Here's where we can say counter cache. Now, by default, if our field on the attachment was called attachment views count, then we could just say counter cache true. But because we're using a name that's a little bit shorter, we're just saying views count instead of attachment views count. We have to specify the name. So this should work. Let's open up the Rails console and we're going to create a new attachment. So we'll say attachment.create, product is product.last, and let's see. Okay, so now we can say attachment view.create is create. Attachment is attachment.last, and customer is customer.last. Okay, so that created the new attachment view. Now look at the SQL that executed as we were running this. So first we see this insert into the attachment views. Totally expected. We see these every single time we work with Active Record, right? Like here's our insert into attachments. This was us adding data into the attachments table. But this is new. This update attachments set the view counts. This is where we're denormalizing and caching the count for the related object. So this is a really cool feature of Rails. It's called counter cache. So if you encounter that later, if you encounter it later, yeah, it's a good one. All right, so now we have the data in the database, or we at least have a shape of the data in the database. Let's create a controller for managing the attachments internally. So we're going to have an attachments controller. And I think the form is going to live on that product show page. So this will just need to have like the create actions. So now let's go to the attachments controller before action, authenticate the user. And then we're going to have this create method. We're going to have a private thing going on, attachment params. And those are going to require the file and also a name. Right. So we need to go to the attachment and say this has one attached file. In terms of the routing for this, I think what we might want to do is nest the create underneath. So we can talk a little bit about nested routing, right? So if we go to the routes file here, right now we have products. We could do resources attachments. That way our routes are going to be nested for attachments underneath products. This is going to give us something like /products/attachments as our create route. So let's add that, and then we'll come over here and say, we'll just put some nonsense in here, and now we can see what the attachment routes look like. Okay, so now we have these routes. So the actual URL path is going to be all nested under products / the ID of the product and then / attachments. Now you'll also notice that here it's still nested under products / product ID / attachment / ID. But if you have the ID of the attachment, you probably don't need to know what product it's related to. And so some people would say, rather than having it nest so deeply, what you could do is instead design your API so that you only have these top level attachments routes when they need to be related to a specific product. And then any other time, if you have the ID of the object, for instance, for a show page, update, or delete, you would move this down to its own proper sort of top level thing like /attachment /ID. And there is a feature for that. And I think I think we can say shallow true. So now if we refresh our routes here and go to attachments, now you'll see that all of the attachment paths that are related to a specific attachment now are they're unnested from product because we already know what product they're related to if we've already created the attachment. So anyways, I think that's how we might want to line this up. And now we can jump over to products. And let's look at a specific product. Okay, so these are going to be the attachments that we want to add. So let's go to our attachments controller again. And we're going to say product is current user.products.find params product ID. So when we're looking again, let's look at these routes one last time. So instead of params ID, like this colon ID here is called a dynamic segment. That's like a part of the path that will become a key in the params hash that's available inside the controllers. Most of the time we say params like attachment.find params ID. That's because by default, this is always called ID. When we're looking at a nested route, this is called product ID. So we're going to see params, product ID, and that's where the ID of the product is going to sit. And that's how we can find the product. So now we're going to be able to say something like attachment is product.attachments.create, attachment params, and then if it was saved, let's see, or yeah, if at attachment.save. So here we can just actually make this new. If it was saved, then we want to redirect to the product path. Otherwise, flash the errors. So actually, if it was not saved, then we'll flash errors, and then in either case, we'll redirect back to the product path. What I think we might want to do is actually use turbo here. So let's take a look at that in a minute. Okay, so, and that's just because we're going to be on the same page. Okay, all right. Let's go back to our products, and we want to edit a specific product. Okay, so now we have all these attachments. Let's update this view so that we can iterate. So product show, that we're actually iterating over the attachments. So product attachments.each do attachment. Okay, and this is going to have the name, attachment.name, and then we'll probably have a link to download it or something, just so that, yeah, the user can actually download their own file. Undefined method attachments for product. So we didn't set up that association yet. So a product has many attachments. Okay, all right, so now we have some list of attachments. Let's remove this add user button. And let's start working on a form at the bottom of this view. So this is going to be a form where the action is going to go to attachment, or is it called product attachment path? This is going to be products attachment path. Okay. And the method is post. All right, let's go over to Tailwind UI and grab some components for working with forms again. Form layouts, stacked. I like the stacked one. Okay, so really we just need an input box and in fact, because we just need an input box and a name, let's just copy a simple input box here. And instead of email, we're going to have the name, and this is going to have attachment name. We're also going to have a file input. So we already talked about file uploading in a previous episode. And so over on the product new page, we actually have a file input. And this is where we talked about the direct upload URL, and we already set up active storage. So if you missed that episode, head over and take a look at how that works. So this here, we actually just want to change the name to attachment file. And all right, that should be good. Now we need to add a button. Come back over, grab a trusty button. This is type submit, and add attachment. Okay. Now if we refresh our page, over here, products /30 31 product attachments path, Right. Okay. So when you have a path that has a dynamic segment like the one we talked about, you have to pass in an argument to populate that ID. All right, so here's our form. It's down below. We actually want this inside of the same sort of column as our attachments table. Not like that. Okay. Boom. Okay, that's looking pretty good. This input box does not actually look how I expected it to look, though. So I think something must be missing here. The name, okay. Also, this form, I think we want to give this some, we might even want to use like a divider or something between the form and the end of the table. But, okay, so this input is not looking how I expected it was. Oh, input type, this should be text. Okay. All right, there we go. That looks much nicer. All right, so let's just say this is like the ebook or something, and then we can say choose file, and we're just gonna put in an image. I know. Add attachment. Wow, look at that. Okay, it's already working. So now we can say, I don't know, this is the audio book, and we can choose a file, and I guess we're gonna open the same file. Add attachment. Okay, now the audiobook is there. So that is super cool. We've got our form, it's adding attachments, and I think that is in a good spot. So right now, I don't know if the files are actually being saved on those attachments. Let's open up the Rails console once more and say attachment.last.file. Okay, so it has a file. It looks like this is an audiobook. And if we wanted to say .url, okay, we've got this URL. We should be able to open this up, and it brings us to AWS where we can download it. Fantastic. All right. Let's make our form just a little bit nicer. All right, let's also add the count of how many views the attachment has seen since the beginning. And so we can add that here. Attachment.viewsCount. And we'll just add another thing here. This is going to be called views. And now we'll refresh. And so our first attachment that we were playing with in the console has one view. That's great. So let's wrap it up there. Thanks so much for watching. In the next episode, we've got a lot more to build, so we're going to keep at it. So thanks again, and we will see you in the next one.